How to Be an Artist, Step 18, Scary Stories, with guest Christian Heidicker.
So the Postmortem with Dallin and Jackie, that would break my heart. I actually cried when I heard, because that was
really?
such like that was a vital part.
Such a true Christian reaction.
Yeah, that was my community away from home. I mean, that was the co-working space that I had. Those were the peoples that I saw every day, and it was heartbreaking. I'll miss it forever.
Yeah, it's I have like always theorized about like, oh hey, what would like an art community look like, and Dallin and Jackie actually went out and did it.
They did it.
So it's like pretty damn ballsy on their part.
And I've heard people from other cities. I've described to them what I have, and people are jealous. They're like, you'd think that a place like LA would have something like that, but either it's astronomically expensive, or it does not have a creative aspect, or. So we were extremely lucky to have that.
No, it was very cool. And as I discussed with them, it was like everyone there was very, very committed, very serious about what they were doing. And it was a place that produced like a lot of really good art,
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I mean, that's kind of one of the big themes I'm kind of interested in like talking about in this podcast in general, is just talking about like how do we build artistic communities, and, hopefully there'll be other versions of Avrec, that pop up. But I mean, all the people and all the connections are still there. So it would, if someone wanted to take the lead and rebuild something, there's already network there, so.
It's true. And I think that was like one of the hardest parts about it for me, but something that hopefully we'll get to start to rebuild as soon as, as soon as the world settles itself just a little bit. That like, I know I'll see you again. I know I'll see Jake again. I know I'll see Mackenzie again. But will I see all three of you at the same time?
Sure. So anyway, since like all of this Corona stuff has happened, it seems like it's been a really interesting ride for you, because like the whole Newbery thing with foxes, Scary Stories for Young Foxes happened. How long was that before all the COVID stuff happened?
Like
weeks?
About 6 weeks. Yeah.
About 6 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you're getting all geared up for promotional stuff.
Yeah.
Yada, yada.
Yeah. It was, I had a whole tour planned through like 15 different cities and all of these speaking events and everything.
Wow.
And then it all collapsed, which, I mean, I was greatly in favor of, so that people would be safe and all of those things. And there were obviously much bigger things to worry about. But yeah, it's been really odd, because I have been struggling as an artist, to survive as an artist.
Oh, really?
For no, I mean like for 11 years.
Okay, leading up to. Yeah, we've had a lot of discussions about that.
Yes, we have. Yeah. You have seen the before and after Christian Heidicker. And then the Newbery happened, and it's just kind of, that's the best possible thing that could have happened to me.
Sure.
Yeah. If you had asked me beforehand, like, what do you want more than anything in the world, I would have probably answered, I want to win a Newbery, and maybe write for Jim Henson's The Storyteller, which is another overlap you and I have.
Yeah, how's number 2 coming along, by the way,
dude? Wait, like the which number 2?
The Jim Henson Storyteller, right? That's the number 2.
So so basically, you put me in touch with them, which was just going to make one of my greatest dreams come true. I have loved the Storyteller since I was 5 years old, and it's what turned
Yeah.
me into a creative person. I found out that you wrote and drew an issue for the Giants miniseries, and I, ran home and picked up. It's so funny because I walked in, I was like, "So what are you working on?" And you were like, nothing that you would have heard of. And I was like, "Tell me anyway." And then you're
Test
like,
me.
"The
Yeah.
Storyteller," and I was, lost
Yeah.
my composure. Um, Ran home, read your issue, and it had actually been one of my favorites, sincerely.
Oh, thanks.
Um, and so yeah, I you very sweetly offered, or maybe I asked, I don't remember. I would not have shied away from that, to introduce me to the editors.
Yeah.
So I wrote them a very strange uh, introductory email where I didn't write it from my perception or perspective. I wrote it from the perspective of the demon that had
Oh, yeah.
perched on my shoulder the first time I watched The Storyteller and refused to leave my shoulder until I wrote something that was that good. And
Yeah.
he was very irreverent and very like money driven, and I liked it. I liked um, insulting the people that I was hoping would hire me more than anything in the world. That seemed like like a risk. Um,
Yeah.
so they were like, oh, they liked it. They liked that
Mm.
letter, and then they said, yeah, let's talk. They saw my previous output, Scary Stories for Young Foxes, and they were like, okay, obviously you can handle this. You're hired. Just pitch us a story. So I did, and they were like, wow, we've never done anything like that, even though it like all played within the rules of the Storyteller.
Hmm.
Uh, but they were like, we just got to run it past the Jim Henson people, and then we'll let you know. And I said, marvelous. And they did, and they came back, and they were like, great, yeah, you're set. We'll let you know what the date is when you need to turn that in.
Hmm.
And I was like, great, I'll keep working on other things. Just let me know. Like 6 months later, after COVID had come, I was like, hey, I just wanted to check in, because I know that the comics industry is really struggling. I hadn't heard back, so I just wanted to tell you I'm still here, still waiting, but not with bated breath because I know that things are really difficult right now. And they got back to me and they said, oh no, yeah, we still want you. You're really great. Just stand by a little bit longer. And then a couple months after that, I went to the comic book store for the first time since quarantine, all masked up and everything.
Uh-oh.
And yeah, and
I'm guessing where this is going.
yeah, and the mini series that they had asked me to write on was already all published and out and waiting in
Jeez.
my holds box. I know, and
Oh,
so that stung. I don't know what
bastards.
happened. I know. But the good
That
news
is
is
that is
that I
such
have.
like a classic story too of like
Does this happen to people? Jeez.
yeah, man.
Um. So the good news is that I had a great story, and I
Mm,
am going to adapt it into a graphic novel, which my
cool.
editor has already um, uh, drawn up a contract for. So that's cool.
Excellent.
But that was a little painful. That was
Yeah.
weird and not great. But to go back to like how have the last 6 months been? They've it's strange to say this when the world is literally burning and
Mm,
under so much catastrophe, but the last 6 months have been some of the best of my life.
good.
I finally, I think like one of the most crippling parts of being an artist is the uncertainty that you are doing anything uh, with meaning. The doing anything that is important, and it in your darkest moments of self doubt, that can really cloud um, your creative process and your intent. And so to win, an award that I've been familiar with since I was a child,
Yeah.
was just hugely validating. And it turned writing into a joy. It made writing harder for sure, because then
Mm.
I felt like there was this bar all of a sudden that I had to clear. And it's a problem that I'm happy to have, but it is
Yeah.
considerably I'm grateful to have it, really, more than happy. It is way more crushing than I ever could have anticipated. It's way heavier. It's a lot scarier. Like
The
when I
expectation
write,
is.
yeah, and when I write a crappy line in Scary Stories for Young Foxes too, like my
Yeah.
past starts laughing at me, and then there
Mm.
are days where I'm like, how in hell's name did I do this? Like, um, the self doubt is real, like
Mm.
it really, and it doesn't go away. It gets more intense. Uh, like the better you do. And then like the award also opened up all sorts of opportunities, like new book contracts and more teaching opportunities. And Foxes got optioned for a TV series that
Ooh,
I
cool.
get to be an executive producer on. So I've had a lot of those types of meetings. And then it was an
I was definitely
audiobook that I got
visualizing
to
it
read.
when I was reading it, so
Yeah, I think it will work
it will
well as
translate
a
well.
TV
Yeah.
show. Yeah, just as long as everything goes smoothly from this point. I've heard that
Hmm.
Hollywood can be even stickier than comic book people. Um,
Sure. Yeah.
and like this month I was asked to start writing for the New York Times.
Oh,
It's like
cool.
a dream come true in every possible way. So I'm distracted, I'm satisfied, I am overworked, and all of those things. And it is a little bit strange to feel when so many other people are suffering. And yeah,
Sure.
you know, I try to balance that by being politically active and
Sure.
donating where I can. And yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you, carving out some time then with how busy things are.
Oh,
I definitely got that sense. And
yeah, of
like
course.
we've been saying scary stories everywhere. So my daughter is constantly like, "Dad, I just saw on Sora. It's scary stories for young foxes." So like I'm sure it's the season too, so it's a great time for it to be out there and for people to be checking it out. I got to say, I should probably take this opportunity just to like sing my praises of the book too. So I just think it's a
Uh,
delightful book. I have read one of your other books and I liked it, and this one I just felt like was on another level.
yeah,
I definitely saw a
yeah.
maturation in your craft, like in this book.
It
So.
was.
Uh,
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
yeah.
Especially coming from somebody whose work I greatly admire. And I think you're spot on. Um, I wouldn't. There's a part of me that's tempted to say that I wish that Foxes was the first thing I wrote, so I just like burst
Hmm.
out of the gate with something that yeah feels a lot more solid and plunges into those depths more than my other work. But the truth is that I had to cut my teeth on something, and
Hmm.
I'm glad that I didn't do it with Foxes, because it would have been worse. It would have been
Hmm.
a lot,
Yeah,
lot worse. It's a solid idea, but I that doesn't mean that I had the chops to turn it into a solid novel. You know?
sure, sure. What is from like your perspective? What would you like kind of point out as the big places where you matured, or things kind of where you
Yeah,
grew in the book, and
yeah.
just kind of, or as yourself as a writer, like.
So, yeah, great question, and that I tracked that so specifically, just in terms of breakthroughs of understanding when it comes to storytelling.
Hmm.
First of all, I really fought against um, using any sort of formula whatsoever,
Hmm. Ooh,
um,
that's
because
tough.
because I thought that would make my stuff formulaic, and it
Sure.
does, it does by definition. But I also thought that it would make everything predictable. I'm like,
Hmm.
well, if I was like, if the Dark Knight of the Soul comes at the same point every time in every movie, then
Yeah.
But when my stuff was not landing quite as firmly as, or it didn't make the same sort of splash that I felt in my heart. um,
Hmm.
then I started to explore a little bit. And so when I wrote Attack of the 50-Foot Wallflower, I used the Save the Cat formula.
Interesting. Okay.
And I felt comfortable with it because I was like, well, like this is kind of a parody of a 1950s sci-fi
Hmm.
film. So why don't I just embrace that and then tweak it in any way that I can? And I saw a huge shift in the reaction. Like I started to get starred reviews from trade publications and more emails. And so I was like, all right, well, here's something. And then at one point decided like that it's kind of strange to take storytelling advice from somebody whose work you don't really admire. And
Yeah.
you'll hear so many people in film and fiction work talk about like Blake Snyder, Save the Cat, like it's the
Sure.
best.
Yep. It's everywhere.
But then if you ask anybody what he created,
Yeah.
they either don't know or they're like, well, that doesn't matter. But the answer
Hmm.
is that like his one success in the world is that he wrote the script for Disney's Blank Check.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Which he brings up as much as possible within Save the Cat.
does he? I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten about
He
all
he
about
ke- he,
that.
he keeps referring to it as the mini hit Blank Check throughout
Oh,
the book.
mini hit Blank Check. Jeez, and I think that's the thing is like if you love Disney's Blank Check, then definitely take Blake Snyder's advice. No, I mean, I think that he has something. I mean, he
Hmm.
does understand formulas and everything. But right before Foxes, and this wasn't the big thing. I'll tell you the big thing in a minute. But right before Foxes, I started studying Dan Harmon's story circles.
Ah,
Um,
okay.
and I think the thing that really broke it open for me was to learn that the guy who created Community and created Rick and Morty, which, I think most people can agree is some of the most out of the box
Oh, geez.
content, episode per episode. And everything feels very unique. It all feels different. It feels consistently surprising. Um, say what you will about Rick and Morty's fan base, it's still a really, really smart show. And so when I
For
learned
sure.
that he was using formulas for those episodes, the same formula every time, I was like, my understanding of formula is completely different than that. I thought that that would make it, all the same. And so I started
Mm.
studying it and I started studying it hardcore. Like not only did
Hmm.
I read his essay, not only did I, whisper to Hannah every single time there was another like section break whenever we watched a movie, I also would sit down with episodes of Community and Rick and Morty and I would draw the story circle and try to figure it out and also try to see
Oh,
how
nice.
he subverted it. I mean that was a lot of my time in Avrec in the theater room was I was just like breaking those things down until it became almost second nature. So
Ah,
Foxes
yeah.
was the first book that I really went to town on story formula. And
Hmm.
not only did I create a story circle for each of the individual tales that's in there, but I also
Hmm.
did an overarching story circle for each character for the entire uh, novel. Because
Yeah.
it's a short story collection in disguise. It's
Hmm.
all of these connect, and you're working with the same characters the whole time. Um,
Yeah.
and that was huge. It's
Hmm.
one of those things where I all of a sudden realized like how the human brain responds to storytelling and why we feel it cyclically, and it comes, it's really um, uh, high concept stuff that's based in Joseph Campbell's work and everything. But that really just made me feel extremely confident about what needed to happen when, in order to get the biggest emotional impact.
How like grueling was the process versus did you feel like you had some sort of template to work with or some sort of like mindset to work with that made the work go like a little bit more smoothly? Like I definitely find sometimes when I'm trying to be original and break away from, formula, that it can just be some like grueling, just like gnawing at a problem type of stuff. How did that
Sure.
feel for you?
I mean, I was really true to the formula in Foxes.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
stuck to it. I was like, if I'm
Oh,
going to
okay.
learn this, then I'm going to make this work here. I haven't really gotten to that place yet where I am branching away from it, or
Hmm.
twisting it or turning it upside down. I think the thing that it did was that it gave everything a place so that I could focus on even deeper stuff, so
Gotcha.
that I could spend more time on dialogue and description and uh, character transformation and all of those things.
Hmm.
Um, I think that like the biggest thing for me, like the biggest change, was when I first was writing the Foxes stories. I sat down and I just kind of hacked out what I thought was scary, and
Hmm.
then just tried to get some initial reactions from readers, and did not get the reactions that I wanted.
Hmm.
And so just like with story structure, I just tried to peel back the layers of why we tell scary stories. Like
Hmm.
what is the deeper resonance in them? What is the meaning behind them? And it took me a long time and many conversations with people who are smarter than I am, but eventually I kind of started to unravel, that we tell ghost stories because there are things in our pasts that we have not handled, that we have not faced or dealt with, and they're still
Ooh,
haunting us,
interesting.
you know.
Ooh,
And
that's
then,
creepy. Just having you tell me that, having you say that, just like gives me the
yeah,
willies.
well, and exactly, and then you immediately affix like a personal experience to something that's supernatural, and all of a sudden
Mm,
it's going to uh, grab hold of you and not let go. Like
yeah.
you're not going to be able to shake it. And I extended that into vampires. Why do we tell vampire stories? And it's
Mm,
essentially, um, the allure of darkness. I would use
hmm.
different words if I were talking to kids about the book. I do, but being seduced by evil.
Yeah. Hmm.
Because vampires are these hideous, horrific creatures that are also very charming, or, in the case of Twilight, very sexy. Um, and even though they can kill you, you still feel drawn in by them. You know, I
Yeah.
I think uh, I think drugs are a vampire story.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
and I think that you can become a lot more flexible with your interpretation of these things once you kind of understand what's happening at the very heart of it.
You familiar? Sorry, are you familiar with the concept of like in Asian mythology of like the hungry ghosts?
I do know them. Yeah.
Hungry ghosts. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's something that feels very akin to vampires to me. And you talk about like drug use, but just
Yeah.
the idea of a being that has this insatiable hunger, and it's just there's
Yeah.
no satisfaction. There's only hunger, no satisfaction.
Wow.
That's a little bit different, but there's kind of this concept that like at different times and phases in our lives, and even times during the day, like there's different archetypes that we inhabit, and like at different times you can be like a hungry ghost. You can be this. That's a whole other thing. But anyway.
No, I think that's spot on. I think that's I mean, and yeah, that's the thing is that like especially when you look at the horror work from different cultures, it shifts because our
Mm.
fears are different and our day to day experiences are different. Um,
The things we
it's
hide are
really interesting.
different culture to culture.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And I would also, go on record that I don't think that this is the end all definition to ghosts and vampires. I think that you could come up with more.
Mm.
But these are what I came to personally, and they really did help give the stories a lot more bite, you know. And I did it for six other horror genres, because there are eight stories in the novel, and then I did it for eight more for the sequel.
Oh,
Um,
geez.
and it's a lot of work, but it pays off, and then all of a sudden you might have like this huge document full of ideas and places and things that you'd like to explore within the story. But once you find that kernel of what it all means, those decisions start being made for you. Where it's like, oh, we don't need
Mm.
this, we don't need that. That doesn't need to be in here because it doesn't really strengthen the main idea.
Mm.
So I would say, story circles first, but then plunging down into the understanding of scary stories was the most vital part. I think that's really what set it apart.
Yeah, that's very cool. Yeah. I guess before I was kind of making a point about it. I mean, the book definitely doesn't read formulaic, and I guess what's happening with the story circles is it's happening at such like a maybe an elemental level that you
Hmm.
can create something based on that it isn't going to feel doesn't feel formulaic, because there's very little that I read in scary stories that's like, oh, this reminds me of this, this reminds me of this.
Good.
It feels very very original. I mean,
Great.
there's obviously, I'm sure you've got the comparisons to something like Watership Down, but
Absolutely. Yep.
that's not a story thing at all, right?
Yeah.
um
It's just like horrific things happen to relatively innocent animals.
yeah.
Yeah, and I also don't run away from comparisons anymore. I
Yeah.
did for a long time where I wanted it to be completely unique. And then I had an experience where when I was working on Attack of the 50-Foot Wallflower, I would try to explain it to people, and
Mm.
I just would have a really difficult time because it's so high concept. And
Yeah.
then one day my agent was like, just to let you know, I'm going to be pitching this as Pleasantville meets Cloverfield. And I was like,
Hmm.
whoa. And so I I tried that on a couple of people, and for the first time they were like, "Oh, I want to read that." And I was like, "Okay, that works." I mean, just
Yeah.
taking two separate pieces in a person's brain and connecting them, and that's not a bad thing ever.
No, it's always helpful if you can get someone to actually read your stuff. That's if without
Yeah,
being too deceptive. That always helps. So
yeah.
if you can find some sort of comparison, that's nice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
I.
And it's not cheating. It's not. Yeah.
Hmm. The one thing that I kind of there's one moment. There's the moment when like Uli. Did you say Uli or Yuli?
I
When
say
he
Uli.
and
I like when people say Yuli too. I don't mind
people can pronounce it however. There's the
any other
part
way.
where him and Mia meet for the first time.
Hmm.
That was probably one of my favorite parts in the book because it reminds me of, you know, Tombs of Atuan, which is the second in the
Ooh,
Arcee
yeah.
series.
Yeah, yeah,
Are you
yeah.
familiar with that?
Sure
It
am.
reminded me very much of that. There's this meeting of Ged, and I can't remember the name of the girl that's the high priestess. But I love this concept of you have two people in a horrible situation, and they have the ability to save each other, but it requires them to like trust each other.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
such
yeah.
such a cool moment. That's the one thing that it really reminded me of something else, and I was like, okay, if it's reminding me of Le Guin, then that's like a good thing. So
That's the best thing. Yeah, that is an amazing compliment. So a couple of things about that scene. First of all,
yeah,
that is my favorite scene too, by far. In
awesome.
fact, I have asked if this TV show does actually get picked up. I've asked if I could write that scene.
Oh, cool,
I was like, that's all I would do, but just I'd like that one, please. I need to write a full
cool.
episode. Second
You
of
don't need to
all,
go like George R. R. Martin on it or anything. You gotta
no,
get back to writing your own stuff. Don't write any of these TV episodes.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, I wouldn't stop. I mean, money's pretty good, right? But second of all, going back to story circles, you have one of the more mind blowing parts of that formula for me was that
Mm,
you've got a character is in a place of comfort, but they want something.
mm,
They are introduced into a new situation that they have to adapt to, and then they get the thing that they wanted
mm,
halfway through the circle. Or
mm.
it can be they can get the thing that they need in order to make it to the end, in order to make it through the dark night of the soul. Like
Yeah.
what do they get there? And it's at the dead center of the circle at the very bottom. And I started to pay attention to that because that floored me. I was like, no, they should only get what they wanted originally at the end
At the
of the
end.
story,
Huh.
right? But then
Yeah,
I
that seems more
realized,
intuitive.
yeah, but then you're kind of just telling a story about somebody who wanted something, and then the end of the story is that they got it, which is yeah, which is just sort of it that fuels a very pessimistic, selfish
Mm,
attitude toward life,
sure.
as
Yeah.
opposed to you wanted something, you get it, and then the worst thing that's ever happened to you happens to you.
Yeah.
There's a payment for getting that, the dark night of the soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Beyond that, often the thing that we want is not what we need. So
Mm-hmm.
that also changes, and so I started to recalibrate my storytelling to be like, oh, well, no, they'll get what they need in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many different ways that you can lay this out. But I just want to point out that Mia and Uli scene happens in the dead center, almost to the word of the novel.
Really.
That's that's how true Fox's is to a formula.
I mean, this is, did you ever do the workshop on like the screenwriting workshop at Avrec
I
where they
did
talk
not
about like
know. I would have
midpoints?
eventually.
That was one of the most interesting things about that whole thing is just like the importance of the midpoint in a story, which is something I never really gathered
Yeah.
before.
Hmm.
But there's real magic that happens at the midpoint. This kind of place where characters turn. It's just something I still don't really understand, and hopefully I have a chance to explore. I'm a little bit like ashamed to say it, but like the truth is, like Green Monk, it really ends at the midpoint, you know. Like
Fascinating.
after I finished it, and then I took that class. I'm just like, okay, yeah, that's kind of the midpoint is where I ended it. Which sorry, folks, anyone
But I
that's
think
that's read it.
I think that's the process, right? I mean, like
Yeah,
when you learn something new and you're like, holy crap, why could I not have been using this
yeah,
from the very beginning? And
mm-hmm,
you kick yourself for not having studied theory earlier,
mm-hmm,
because I think that the greatest danger that you face as a creator is the expectation that the people who experience your art will have the same feelings you did when you first saw those images in your head.
mm-hmm.
Because you see those things and you are stoked. You're like, this is so exciting. This is so new. No one's ever seen
Yeah.
this. Not really realizing that, most people's brains fall into patterns, and
Mm,
the idea of originality, it's there, it exists, But in order for this to have the same impact that it did on you initially, you need to tend to it. You need to
Mm,
give it universality. You need to make sure that you know the insides and outs of every moment and how it makes another person feel. And of course, this is like maybe I'll get there when I'm 74. Um, but I mean, I'm constantly trying to refine that, and I think after I had published 4 books and I was still like, oh, wait a second, having the experience you had, like, oh, I did not do this really, really brilliant piece of literary advice or story structure advice in any of my novels so far. That's when I started to just, you know, plead ignorance about everything, and then I devour YouTube videos and theory books, um,
mm,
like I am just starting out right now, and
that's
that
good.
makes creating really exciting, because it means I have more fingers on the puppet strings. It means that I
Sure.
know how the story will land better. Of course, you know, I always think of the time that was it Andrew Stanton gave a TED talk about how he only studies story theory, and he had perfected like the storytelling technique to the point where he was just going to blow tons of minds, and then
Hmm.
the book that he or I mean the next movie that he revealed during that TED talk was John Carter of Mars. And you're like, "Oh no." Well, it turns out you can get a big head about it too, and then maybe not
Sure.
be tending to all the things you need to. Ew.
Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
also, I wonder if it's a little bit like, it's always a fantastic feeling when you write something and the intuition is there and you're just
Hmm.
like, oh, I know how this is going to go. This is going to happen this way, blah, 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 blah. And it just all comes out. But like when you don't have that, it's really nice to have some tools that you can
Yes.
get under the hood and say like, okay, let's figure out why this isn't working, how I can get through this particular like blockage or problem or whatever it is. So yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. I
theory
think
theory can be helpful for that.
I also think that I mean, there's so much to talk about here, but I also think that the tools should come after your initial stab at it,
Mm.
because that uncut gem of ideas or dream stuff or whatever, I
Oh
think that's
yeah,
also really important. um and then beyond that, or what helps with that a lot, I think, and this is kind of the stuff that I want to be exploring a lot more in my work, but I think that meditation plunges down into human experience that
hmm.
cannot be formulated. I when I watch things like Twin Peaks: The Return or
Sure.
Adventure Time or these shows where they defy everything that we know about storytelling, or many things we know about storytelling, but they still like awaken these unbelievable
Oh
feelings in
sure.
you.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
That's where I want. That's the next horizon for me.
Yeah, and I think some of the best artists, there's clearly something there going on. I actually, speaking of Tombs of Atuan again, I remember reading Le Guin's kind of like she had a little essay at the end of it where she's kind of talking about it and just how the decisions she made just came from a very deep intuitive place. You know, it's just
Yeah.
like this whole idea of you have all these tools and guides, but then making a decision as an artist where you just feel like this feels right.
Yep.
Having access to that part of you, and sometimes it can be incredibly bizarre.
Hmm.
But it can also feel right.
Well, I think that the right, creating art from the gut where you're just
Mm.
like, I'm putting this in here. I don't know why, but it feels exactly right. There's no sort of
Yeah.
guidebook that says, and then you're going to need a dash of this. And it isn't
Yeah.
until years later that you look back at it and you realize what was happening. That it
Hmm.
actually does have a very specific meaning and a very specific connection to what you were talking about. But it was so ethereal at the time. Like your brain was still putting it together subconsciously that you didn't even understand where it was coming from. And you
Yeah.
you touched on that exactly. Like when I watched Twin Peaks: The Return, I was having all of these reactions and all these emotions, and I didn't know why. I was just
Yeah.
like, "This is happening to me, and I love it." And I could not possibly describe to anybody how he did it. That's
Do
unbelievable.
you, is there a feeling when you're experiencing that where you like want to investigate further? Like, what does this mean? It's like, okay, this means something. There's a feeling of depth here. Does it make you want to try to like understand that more? Like, how much did you rewatch those shows
Oh,
that of,
oh, I've watched. So Twin Peaks: The Return is 18 hours long, and I've watched it four
mm,
times now.
okay,
Um,
okay.
and then I've watched all of the theory videos online, and
Mm,
read the Reddit threads, and oh, I love it. I love it.
yeah.
That's what I want in my work. I want bottomless mystery. Um,
Yeah.
that stuff's
This
cool.
is I mean, I'm never going to stop yapping about Wizard of Earthsea, but that's kind of how that book functions for me, where the second I read it, it was just this mystery that had to be explored. And it's just, I keep revisiting it, and there's so much there that it kind of reveals, but it's also stuff that like illuminates my own life. Like that's what's really amazing about it, is it just like
Absolutely.
makes me understand my own life in a more profound way. Which is, so this, I kind of want to lead up on this. We when we initially started recording, you were kind of bringing up this topic, but I'm really curious about how meditation like is like ties in with creativity with you, because I know that you do like TM meditation, and I know
Hmm.
that David Lynch is big, like, oh yeah, this is a big creative tool for me. And I know that's why our mutual friend Cole Glass, he does TM because, oh, it's this tool for creativity. In my own case, even though I've had very deep, profound, uh, redundant experiences with meditation, like it's just a core part of my life, I haven't really found it to be a very good tool of creativity. So I'm kind of
Hmm.
interested in how it is like a creative tool for you, or if it is at all.
For sure. So to start, it is.
Okay.
I signed up for transcendental meditation right after I saw the pilot for Twin Peaks: The Return. I
Okay.
watched that. I had those feelings, and I thought, I want what he's having. And I signed up that week. Um, and in my experience, and I will say that I started doing that right before Foxes too, right before I started working
Hmm.
on Foxes. So it's been a few years that I've been doing it, and uh, so I'm still figuring out how it works or why it
Yeah.
works. Um,
Yeah.
I think that even if you look at the world's biggest meditators, and I'm
Hmm.
going to get down to brass tacks in a second, but I think if you look at the world's biggest meditators like David Lynch, Jerry Seinfeld, Ellen DeGeneres, the Beatles, like
Yeah.
they all practice transcendental meditation. Not to mention
Hmm.
Licky Lee, who a lot of people don't know her, but she's one of my favorite artists.
Hmm.
And they all have this universality about them, right? Where
Hmm.
they've tapped into something where a huge audience stands up and listens, right?
Hmm.
I mean, Ellen has her talk show. She was obviously a brilliant uh, stand-up comedian before then. We won't talk about any of the problematic stuff.
Sure.
Um, Jerry Seinfeld. I mean, biggest sitcom of all time. the Beatles. I don't know if you've heard of them. Um, but there is something where, because David Lynch talks about how there's a unified consciousness that you are visiting in your head
Hmm.
whenever you meditate like this. And I don't know. I think even just by that metric, by looking at like the biggest celebrities who do it, I think that they're tapping into something, especially since they've all been doing it for decades. For me
Yeah,
personally, it's really hard to write and turn off the chatter.
sure.
I'm the sort of person where my apartment is spotless before I start working, because if there's anything there that could distract me, like if I get stuck on a sentence, then I'm like, oh, I'll go do the dishes. I get stuck on
Yeah,
another sentence, I'm like, oh, I'll go vacuum. Um, or you're concerned about your relationships or money or whatever. Like all of that is just turned up to 11 whenever you sit down to write, because that's your body's defense mechanism for not wanting to do something that's so wrenchingly
sure.
difficult. And
Yeah,
for me, with meditation, those voices get a lot quieter. Sometimes they tap out
yeah,
completely. And then I can find the source of something, or I can sit in quiet and locate answers whenever I'm sitting down at the keyboard. The answers don't come when I'm actually meditating. I think if they were to, then that would mean I wasn't doing it properly, because you're focused on your mantra and not on the monkey mind that's going crazy and
sure.
screaming up the walls. But really, I think it's just something that allows you to connect with quiet and to connect with the work in front of you completely. And I've got a feeling like the more I do it, the more things will come up. But that to me,
Yeah.
like on a very basic level, is what it does.
Yeah, I would say I agree with you that I think it's a nice way to frame it. I think sometimes I have this expectation that like, oh, it's going to be this generator of ideas for me,
Yeah.
but it's certainly I is a thing where it can teach you to like have a quiet mind. Um, one of the nice ways I like to think about it is within the practice that I am doing, there's this idea of hindrances. There's certain
Hmm.
hindrances that crop up as you're meditating. And part of the skill with meditation is learning to recognize them and then having a response to them. And there are things like sloth or, tiredness, sleepiness, aversion, like wanting, grasping, clinging. The other ones aren't coming to me at present, but it turns out that those are the same things that get in the way of making art.
Yeah.
And so this practice of
Yeah.
learning to deal with hindrances while you're meditating, it translates like very well over to when I sit down to work. And I now have a little post-it that has the hindrances. When I sit down to work, I do a little assessment where I look at those and I say, okay, what hindrances am I experiencing right now? And I have
Whoa.
tools from meditation that I can apply to those hindrances. And usually I'm able to get in a place that's like pretty quiet and calm. um, so I don't know, I think maybe it makes you creative just by allowing yourself to be you and not be like distracted and because I
That's
still feel
perfect.
kind of like, yeah,
Allowing yourself to be you. I think
yeah,
that one phrase means more to the creative process than almost anything, because you are not the thing that needs to go do the dishes right now. You are not
yeah,
your panic about money. You are
yeah,
not all of the formulas and editorial suggestions and friends who didn't like your stuff, chattering in your head. And so, in order to just really create the thing that is more you than anything, you have to train to turn those other things down. And that's
yeah,
all it is. Whenever people tell me they can't get themselves to meditate, they've tried, they've sat down, I always tell them, think of it like a push up. Like, yeah, you might not have
Mm-hmm.
done it the first time, um,
Mm-hmm.
but you might do it the 50th time. And, you
Yeah.
just kind of have to decide how important it is to you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. The one thing you hear commonly is people say like, yeah, I sit down and just like my mind is just like all over the place. And it's like, well, actually that is meditation. You're recognizing that you aren't in control of your mind. That's like the
Yeah.
first great insight of meditation. And people
Yeah.
take that as, oh, I'm failing at meditation. But that's like, no, when you recognize that your mind is wandering, then that's like doing a rep,
Yeah,
good work.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna
Yeah.
incorporate what you just said. Um, in fact, I think that all of this stuff is the best advice that I could give to any creator in the world, any aspiring creator. I'm sure many
Yeah.
other creators could teach me plenty, as you have.
It's, I'm just kind of thinking too, one of the hindrances I forgot that I never would have guessed is a barrier to making art for me is doubt. And so that's a very interesting thing that I've noticed when I sit down to work is like feelings of doubt that crop up. And I just
Yep.
wasn't aware of those before, but feelings of like, what are people going to think of this work? Oh man, there's a lot of stuff. I don't think I can do it, you know? But
Yeah.
yeah, being able just to quiet your mind enough to just sit down and just work can be a really, really nice fruit of doing a practice. So I still think you need to have like the mind you bring to it might make a difference. Like David Lynch still may have something going on in there other than TM that's making the stuff as good as it is.
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think that you could meditate and find that you should not be a writer or a comic book artist.
Mm, yeah.
You know
Well,
that
speaking of, I haven't like left completely, but that was one of my big insights that came to me with my first big breakthrough was just this thing of like, oh, I have this identity as an artist, and like that doesn't need to be who I am.
wow.
So I went through a pretty long period where I mean I'm still within this period where I'm not creating very much of anything, and I'm just now starting to have the desire to do that again. But yeah, that's a great, if you can get that too, if you're like, why am I wasting my time chasing this thing that's just making me miserable,
Yeah.
that's fantastic too.
Yeah. 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 This is kind of off the beaten path, but I read this just wonderful, wonderful thing from Neil Gaiman yesterday, where
Mm.
somebody tweeted him and asked, "Hey, I can't get my lazy ass to write. Will you tell me something to inspire me to get back to the computer?" And Gaiman responded, "Why? Why
Yeah.
would I give
Yeah.
you some magical elixir that forces you to write when,
If you don't want to.
yeah, and when that space could be filled with other writers who want it so much that they're working every day?" That
Yeah.
I,
That's
I'm
that's
I'm
so
rooting
good.
for them. They're the ones who deserve the publication space that you want but aren't actually trying for. And I
Yeah.
get asked whenever I visit schools, whenever I do workshops, whatever. I get asked that question all the time, and
Oh,
a lot of the
it's a
time
universal question, isn't it?
it is, yeah. A lot of the time, like I try to tell them the tools that I use for those days when writing just feels absolutely impossible. Um,
Uh-huh.
and I mean, I this last month has been just murder for me, and my big tactic is that I bribe myself with episodes of Great British Baking Show for every paragraph I finish editing. It's like 10 minutes of work and then I get to take an hour break. That's when it's excruciating, right? When there are
Sure.
when there are other elements at play that my weekly meditative mind cannot excuse. And but I like Gaiman's response so much more.
That's such a fantastic. I mean, there's something about just the current, like the way that our minds all work, that problem. Something is wrong with just like our cultural way of looking at the world that we share, that question comes up so often. And I don't know exactly what the problem is, but like I remember the experience many years ago when I first started meditating, and there was some dude that came into a meditation class and he's like, yeah, I meditate half an hour every day. And I was like, how do you do that? How do you motivate yourself to meditate every day? And he's
Hmm.
like, I don't know. I just do it, and I was beating up myself over the fact that like I wasn't doing it regularly, when it was just like, when it was time, when like the seeds were planted, it wasn't a question. Like it wasn't something I had to motivate myself to do. Like it happened.
Right. Yep.
So it's just like we are trying too much to like force our lives to be something instead of letting our lives unfold as they are.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I definitely have sympathy, I
Sure.
because creating art, or sitting down at a computer and hacking out words, um, is a very unnatural process.
Mm,
Sitting down and trying to get your brain to stop focusing on things or worrying about things is an unnatural process. You can also point out that the number of distractions and things that make us panicky in our lives are also unnatural. So
that's
you're
probably
you
pretty
are getting
unnatural too.
yeah. So you're definitely getting yourself back to a more natural state by doing this. But there's an oddness about it, and I do think that most creators I know at least have to get over this initial hump of your body fighting back against that idea that you're going to be sitting at a computer for several
Oh,
hours
absolutely.
trying to be creative, or you're going to sit down and be completely quiet. So I do sympathize with that, but I think what you said is so right. Like there's a moment where you let go and you're no longer forcing yourself to do it. You're doing it because you love it. And
Hmm.
it's important to you, and you have seen something in the distance that you want to strive for, and the way that you're living your life currently is uh, not cutting the mustard. So you
Sure.
start to make some changes. Yeah, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy.
Yeah. I found I got to the point where I could pretty reliably do like 4 hours of work a day was like in the bag.
Hmm.
But
Yeah,
for me, there was always like, okay, after that point, things got like exponentially like harder to do and less
yeah,
pleasant to do. Do you have
yeah.
kind of like a breaking point like that too?
You know what? I have a really uh, diff- difficult time like understanding time. Um, so there are days when I worked for like 5 or 6 hours, but my brain is so panicky about where I'm at with it that it's like, what did you work like 10 minutes today? You suck. Um,
Sure.
so I don't really know what my cutoff point is. I don't try to time
Mm,
myself, and I also, I'm like breaking it up with television or books or
sure. Okay.
talking to friends. So yeah. A while ago, I told Hannah, I was like, I feel so lazy.
Mm,
I haven't done anything in a long time, um, and I just, I feel very incomplete. And she said, you do realize that you finished recording an audiobook for Foxes yesterday, right? And I was like, that was yesterday? And she was like, yeah. I was like, I thought that was like 2 weeks ago. And she was like, no, it hasn't even been 24 hours yet since you finished recording an audiobook. And I was
yeah.
like, I'm so glad you were here to tell me that. I don't feel lazy at all anymore. I just felt
Hey,
tired because I put a lot of myself into it, and my tired brain was like, "You suck."
you don't have anything left. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
exactly.
well, thank God for having people in your life that can
I
like
know.
bring you back to reality, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's important, and I don't
Yeah.
understand. I have plenty of people I know who do not have supportive people in their lives. They have
Hmm.
partners who will like not take their art seriously, or will are only critical of the output they make, and I'm just like, I don't know how
Yeah.
you could possibly live like that. I would I would break up with them. I would not.
Yeah,
I would not stay with anybody who did not give me that sort of feedback or whatever. Yeah. But that's coming from a place where I feel for the first time in my entire creative career, I feel confident in what I do, and that was
that's
hard
awesome.
won. Yeah,
It probably came a little bit late. You probably could have. Come on, you were really that doubtful until was it? When did that change? When did you feel
absolutely.
confident?
Newbery.
Newberry.
Yeah, yeah. It changed
Yeah,
at 4:30 in the morning on January 28th of this year. You know,
you're
it.
like I can do it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because before then, like my books, none of my books had earned out. They none of them
Mm,
had sold enough copies where the publisher made the money back that they paid me for it.
yep, I know that feeling.
Yeah, and that's a hard place to be. I think that being on the other side of it now, I can definitively say that that should not be any sort of metric for success because there's so many elements at play that are outside of your control that you can't let that dictate how well you do. And the fact of the
Hmm.
matter is that like 95% of all books don't earn out. It might even be higher.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, like
But
that's
getting that
the way the game
affirmation
works.
sure feels great, though, right?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
But it also was a matter of not quitting, and it was also having
Hmm.
having an editor who believed in me. You know,
Mm,
um,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, we're definitely diving into that doubt aspect now. And like the doubts are still very much alive. I'm like, what if that's my only book that ever earns out? What if
Sure.
Newbery is the best thing that happened to me, and or that ever happens to me? And I mean, genuinely, fine. Like that will be great. I will accept that. I
Yeah.
feel really gratified. But at the same time, like for somebody whose entire being like goes into their creative work, it can be very scary too.
It's
So
a tough life being an artist for sure. I
yeah,
mean, I think I remember before the Newbery dropped, we were like talking about like paying the it's like strategies for paying the bills, and we were like, yeah, how about little like I have a friend that's like doing like drug testing right now, or like having this serious conversation about what it would be like to do like drug testing, so that you could have time to do like
right.
writing.
Yeah, like like how sleepy do these pills make you? How how engorged will my liver become? Because if you're going to stick me in a hospital room for 48 hours and just pump me full of pills, but then the rest of the time is mine, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
like I do remember that conversation. I at that point was struggling so much, like my financial cliff was on its way, that for the first time in 10 years I was like, okay, even with me scraping by and writing as much as I possibly can, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to get by.
Yeah.
So I got a job as a tutor, and uh, my first day was the day I won the Newbery. So
That's
I
awesome, man.
showed up. Yeah, like I had been woken up at 4 in the morning by the committee, and then like I had an appointment with this kid at 3 o'clock. I went to it. I called around and I
Hmm.
was like, hey, just to let you know, I'm not doing this anymore. But they didn't have another tutor lined up for him, so I was like, well, I'll go. And I'm like on cloud nine, and he's like, help me with my math homework, and I'm like, sure, yeah, all right, here we go.
He's like, you ever heard of the Newbery Award, kid?
I did say that. What a
I hope he
douchebag.
remembers that. Yeah, that's awesome. Uh,
I'm like, math. Let me tell you about the Newbery. I don't even know why I said math. I was his English tutor. I was very confused. I was sleep deprived and giddy, and probably not the best tutor in the universe.
that's okay. Well, anyway, Christian, I have to head out to go get a family photo taken here pretty soon. But
This was such a
otherwise,
great conversation. I had
it was fun.
the best time. Yeah. let me know if you want to do this again, because the creative process is eternal, and I'm sure we'll have plenty more to say in the future.
Yeah. Always really, really fascinating talking to you. And man, I just know there's so many other topics we could delve into. I just wish we'd recorded every other conversation we'd had up to this point, you know?
We'll make it up. We'll pretend like we've never met before, and we'll record more where we just cover it all for sure.
That sounds amazing, man. Hey, thanks again. Again, well, like super well deserved on the Newbery. Enjoy the success you're having right now, and yeah, I hope we have a chance to catch up sooner than later.
I appreciate it, brother, and I will be there in a heartbeat.
Awesome. Take care, man. You've been listening to How to Be an Artist. To support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/H2BNA.